Okay, so I've got our template to match this guy, you can see. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to effectively cut a handle of walnut and pre-fit that in there. So we're going to get rid of this, we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to take that handle part. I'm going to come back, we're going to glue down template to the wood. And again, these templates are clear acrylic. I'm just not taking the protective paper off this guy. Use our flush trim router bit with the router template attached to just round all this off and make it perfect so it'll perfectly fit in the mold. Got our handle. I'm gonna pry that guy off. Take the rest of that wood off, or take the rest of the glue off. Test fit it to the mold here. And yeah, it's a pretty darn good fit. We're gonna go ahead and spray our mold release. We do have a bunch of mold releases we recommend. This is just one of them. It's a smooth-on universal mold release. There's also like the Man 200 ease release, smooth-on ease release. They all kind of work the same. The key is that you want to have a non-silicone based release for these silicone molds. And for this project, we are using Makerpoxy by Total Boat and Just Crow, very similar to the tabletop resin that Total Boat has. So you have to remember when you're looking at this mold that the top here is actually going to be the bottom, whereas the bottom of this mold actually be the top. With some of our other molds that don't have these specific insets, it doesn't matter, the top, bottom, whatever you choose is fine. But with this mold, you know, we're working backwards. Whatever we lay first is going to be on top. So we're actually going to take our live edge, instead of going this way, we're going to go this way, and we're going to fill it, rather not fill it, but put a nice layer of clear resin down. And using the Total Boat Makerpoxy, because it does set up really quickly, it's very, very thick, and it's going to allow us to do some ocean waves and stuff like that when we get to the next step. Now, Makerpoxy is a 1-to-1 ratio product, so we're just going to go ahead and mix up roughly 20 ounces. Again, it doesn't matter because we are only doing a thin layer of this, and Makerpoxy is good for typically up to 1/4 inch. So because it is a 1-to-1, we're doing roughly, well, we're doing exactly as close as possible, 10 and 10. So I've got our clear resin all mixed up. I'm going to create a nice base layer there. I don't need to worry about weighing down the wood this time because it's such a small amount of resin and such a small piece of wood that we're just going to let it set. So we've got our clear layer down, roughly 1/4 inch of the Makerpoxy. And now we're going to add our waves. So for our waves, I didn't cover this in the video series. It is more like a resin art specific type topic. There's a lot of YouTube videos, by the way, including some here on our YouTube channel about making resin, ocean waves and resin art. But what I'm going to use instead of a typical mica or mica synthetic, like a pearl pigment, instead of a powdered pearl pigment, we're using a liquid. I think these are alcohol-based pigments. This one is Aluminite White, and it basically creates a super white paint-like not consistency, but clarity. So I've already mixed some into a tiny little jar. I've taken some of the Makerpoxy in a small amount. I've mixed some white into there, and it is white like paint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that and just run a couple of small lines through here to create our waves. I'm going to use a toothpick or a stir stick to kind of start the waves, and I'm going to use my heat gun to kind of blow out the waves. I'm certainly not a resin artist. This is not my forte. So I'm going to do the best I can. We're kind of going for a look here. It's all part of the process, right? So just bear with me as I do this. Clearly not the nicest example of lacing resin waves for ocean art, but it's going to do. It serves our purpose. We're going to let that set overnight, and it is Makerpoxy, so it sets in 12 to 24 hours. We'll come back and we'll do a top coat on that to fill it up of like a sea blue, and that'll complete our resin and wood ocean themed flight board. It's the next day, and the first layer of our ocean themed flight paddle board is not quite set yet. It is still, you can see it's a little bit of flex in that mold. It's fine. So it would be fun. It would be a good time now to do that second layer. I could probably rough this up a bit. I'm going to just a little bit with some hand sanding, because we want to make sure that there's a good bond between the first layer and the second layer. But because I've only got about 3/8 of an inch, not quite half an inch of height here to fill, I'm going to go ahead again and use Makerpoxy. As you know from watching our earlier videos and the Epoxy Resin Wood Basics series with the epoxy module, this is really good for 1/4 inch, up to 1/4 inch, but really in larger volumes. In a small volume like this, 3/8, not a problem. So I'm going to use this, and that's going to allow us to get that product done faster. It's going to set fine, and we're going to mix them up. I've got 2 containers out here because I want to mix a darker blue and a lighter blue, thinking like this is the beach, lighter blue for the shallower water, darker blue for the deeper water. That's the idea. And typically with the Makerpoxy, because it's such a thick material, it does stay together. It doesn't color bleed a lot because it is so thick, unlike the other project that we may have done in this series, which used the Thick Set Fathom, very, very water thin. It's going to kind of mix and kind of go all over the place. These colors will generally stay separated because it is such a thick epoxy. So I'm going to go ahead and mix that up. And remember, we have a 1-to-1 ratio on this guy. So I'm going to measure this out, mix it up into 2 different containers, and then we'll add our dual blue pigments. Just going to scuff up that surface, trying to stay away from the edges of the mold. We don't want to sand the silicone and rip it. It's not going to rip, but it could possibly damage it if it was a coarse sandpaper. Doesn't have to be perfect. Again, this stuff is not fully cured anyway, but we do want to have a little bit of a rougher surface for this next layer to adhere to. All right, I'm going to get our black diamond pigments, and I'm going to just do, I want this board to be somewhat clear, so I'm just going to do a tiny little bit of pigment in each one. So we've still got some translucency there, which is kind of what I'm going for. I don't want deep, completely opaque color. I want this board to be a little bit see-through. Kind of like water. I'm going to do the deeper blue one now. Probably gonna add some darker blue here. Doing lighter closer to the beach area and darker here. To make this a little bit more natural, I'm just going to kind of blend it a little bit. Because with this thick resin, it's not necessarily going to blend itself. That's the good thing about this art resin, is that it's made for this purpose to not just get all wacky and color mixed when you pour it. Okay, we're going to let this set 12, 24 hours. We'll come back and it will be ready to demold, and we can plane it down, get rid of the rest of the height on that on the handle, and we'll be good to go. It's the next day and this pour is fully set. It's not fully cured, but it's set enough that we can demold it and start to finish this piece. You can see the transparency there already, which is what I was going for. And then the cool thing about these silicone molds is just they peel right off. You get that suction sound. Wow. Pretty cool. So to finish this, we're gonna run this side through the planer. This side's okay, this is kind of what we want. We might have to do a little bit of a quick sand with like a high grit on the top of that, but this we're gonna plane, sand, and then we'll just finish that entire thing up. Next thing we're going to do is run this through the router table and get an edge on it. Now there was a void in that piece of wood that I should have probably inspected before I put it in our mold. So basically you can see that entire, I don't want to say rotted area, but that area that's really, really rough there. It just got caught by the planer and just took the excess piece off. So there's obviously some sort of a crack or a seam there. Not a big deal. We're going to sand this out and round it out, and we'll still have a really nice board on that side. Now where I would normally start with 80 or 120 grit, I'm actually going to start with 180 grit, because all I have here is the planer marks in the back, and I don't really want to rough up this too much. Okay, so brought this entire thing, other than the wood part, up to 800 grit. After I did the original 800 grit sand, I put some water on it, And then I went over with the hand grit again, essentially wet sanding this thing just to make it extra smooth. I could get more clarity out of this. As you can see, you may be able to see, this part in the top, rather in the recessed parts, that's like the original resin. We didn't sand that at all, so it's perfectly clear. But we've got a little bit of a matte finish on the top because we did sand that with 800. But once I add the oil to this entire thing, I'm guaranteeing that it will get a lot more clear and a little bit more concise. So we're gonna go ahead and oil that up and our project will be done. And I'm gonna use our Total Boat Wood Honey, which is a food safe finish. Wouldn't necessarily have to use that finish on this board. I could certainly, spray it or lacquer it or varnish it because it's not gonna be in contact with food. There's just gonna be for glasses. But this is a really easy to finish to use. I'm gonna use my super small glove because I ran out of large ones and Amazon hasn't delivered my new ones yet. So I've got extra small ones that my daughter wears. So forgive the ridiculous looking gloves. You don't really need much of this stuff. And it doesn't really absorb into the resin, but it will penetrate that top layer where we sanded, where there's gonna be like microscopic voids essentially. It's really gonna it's gonna really penetrate the wood, but it's more or less just gonna create a kind of a film on the resin. So we're gonna let this sit here for roughly 20 minutes, half an hour, and we'll come back and wipe all the extra oil off that wasn't absorbed into the wood. Enough time has passed that any finish that's left here should have been absorbed. So I'm just gonna really just buff it all off and get rid of the excess, especially around the resin where I'm gonna have to do this a couple of times, right? Because especially with that resin where it's not absorbing the oil, you might just it's gonna have a little top layer of oil. You're gonna probably have to wipe it a few times just to get rid of any sort of residue that's left on there. But the wood looks amazing with this oil finish. Can you see me through there a little bit? That is a completed project. Our wood and resin 4-place beer/wine flight board.